Today's presentation, Women's Artists Networks and Collective Action from the 1970s until today. My name is A.I.R, and I'm here as the curator with New Harmony Gallery of Contemporary Art. So you may or may not know, right now we have our 50th exhibit, Look Both Ways, 50 years at the gallery. This presentation is very much an extension of that show. We have some really incredible artists in that show, some of whom happen to be women artists. And so this presentation really started with, when I was organizing the exhibit, seeing, oh my gosh, we've had a women's art symposium in 2010. We've had incredible solo shows of women artists. What can I do to really drive home the impact, one, that the gallery has had, and two, that the very impressive quality of the women artists that we have had, how can I show that here? And I didn't want to do that in like a straightforward way. It's more fun to do it in a fun way. So the way that I'm doing it is by looking at, through the history of the gallery, which was founded once again in the year 1975, until today roughly, so the early 1970s to today, what kind of spaces have we had that were run really to highlight all of the incredible wealth of artwork that women artists have had a chance to show, to champion, often for themselves, on top of many, many other responsibilities and commitments. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you 4 different spaces specifically to highlight and to present artwork, often run by women, showing women's work. It might be spoken word, it might be painting, it might be performance art. It often was performance art, right? So there's all these kind of experimental ways that women were just really the driving force in showing their work. And again, a lot of what you'll hear today happened over the course of the history of our lovely New Harmony Gallery of Contemporary Art. So you can also look at that and say, what else was happening in the world as the gallery was starting to grow? And how can we make sense of that? Just a real quick plug, we do have a closing weekend, November 7th, 8th, and 9th. So on Friday, November 7th, from 3 to 5, we'll have a block party where you can make some friends at the gallery. If it's this nice out, you bet we're going to be out on the street. We'll have some music, some food. It'll be great. It's all ages. So feel free to bring your kids or your cousins or your neighbors. On Saturday, November 8th, from 1:30 at the Athenaeum, so not at the gallery, at the Athenaeum Visitor Center, we have our 50th celebratory event. And that's going to be a series of speakers and presentations. It's really a once-in-a-lifetime event. So I hope you're able to make it. It's free. We will have a reception after. That may or may not be free, but we are going to have an auction, so a silent auction and a live auction after that. So it's an afternoon at the Athenaeum. As you may or may not know, it's also the Blues Festival that weekend, so if you want to make a weekend of it, that's a good time to do so. How many of you here are familiar with the Trees of 40 Fruit? You don't have to raise your hand, just a nod, just a little bit, yeah. So Sam Van Aken, who's the artist who created those living artworks, will be here. At 10:30, we're having a breakfast at the Branches. Free food. It's just, I'd say a mid-morning breakfast with Sam. And I don't know how many times he's actually visited since we've installed those trees. So he's going to be here explaining his process and answering questions, and that is free. So I hope to see you there. And with that, I will pull up my notes and we can launch right into today's talk. Hopefully. Yes, good. So in trying to format this presentation today, I thought the easiest way to add some context is who were the artists in the exhibit who are also in today's presentation, right? So I have a list of them here. You have some of the artists who were in dialogue. The ones I was able to find out about were in sort of these overall, I'd say like women's art, collective art action conversations, where Mary Beth Edelson, who's been to the gallery and to New Harmony not once but twice, she was part of A.I.R gallery, and I will be outlining exactly what spaces we're speaking about shortly. Janet Olivia Henry has presented at A.I.R. She's an integral part of the Just Above Midtown art space, which is a space for African American artists to show when they were not having shows at major museums in the 60s and in the 70s. So you also have here Dr. Margaret T.G. Burroughs. She was integral to the founding of the Chicago Southside Community Art Center. It is still up and running today. She was a formidable part of the art scene in Chicago, so we would have been very familiar with another space we're going to talk about today in Chicago. A.I.R, who just had a solo show this past year at A.I.R, Ann Lannert, Marianne Mishna, and Janet Lawrence, all of whom showed at the Women's Institute and Gallery, which is probably an art space many of you know well, which we're also going to be discussing today. So if you go in clockwise order from the top left, you have a framed print. It's called Noboru, and that's the word for flag in Japanese. And that work is by A.I.R Rodriguez-Izumi, has a solo with us next June and July. After that, you have a print of a mother and child motif, and that's by Dr. Margaret Burroughs, who once again was a Chicago artist and arts leader there. At the bottom right, you may not know, that's by Marianne Mishna, who's here with us today. And that's on the participation wall. And then the final print you have here is a work by Mary Beth Edelson, who made a portfolio here in New Harmony. So that is what you're looking at. And these are some of the artists who have links to both our show and to the 4 spaces we're going to be speaking on today. Let me give you a little bit of background on why I was interested in this subject matter. So I have an undergraduate, I have a BA in art history and Asian studies. And I thought, well, I want to study Asian art. And I was living in New York after I went abroad to study and then to teach in Japan. And New York, I saw so much incredible art outside in public spaces. You have the Public Art Fund, you have these monumental sculptures. And I said, you know what, no. I want to look into public art. So I started at City College of New York after working for a satellite office of the Department of Cultural Affairs in New York City, which was during Hurricane Sandy. That was interesting. I then worked for More Art with the artist Dred Scott to do a performance art piece of him actually walking against a fire hose, recreating a civil rights action. That was pretty phenomenal. I said, I think this is it for me. So I started at City College in the Master's in Art History program. I was there part-time. I was working for Crozier, which is an art shipping company. So I learned a lot about how art should be treated. And while I was at City, I said, you know, I also want to take a class at Hunter College. So I did. And Hunter and City, the City College of New York is known as Harvard on the Hudson. It is a public institution, but it's very rigorous, as is Hunter. I learned a lot there. And then the pandemic hit. And I said, well, I don't really want to be going 45 minutes on public transit. We hadn't quite figured out how to do online classes yet. I said, I think I'm going to transfer. And so I joined Lindenwood University, which is in St. Charles, Missouri's online MA in Art History and Visual Culture program. And at that point, I'd already studied abroad on a fellowship in Germany, the Netherlands, and in Turkey to learn about Elm Green and Dragstad, who work together as a duo. They mainly do public art. And so I said, yeah, this is what I'm doing. They said, well, we don't have a faculty advisor that specializes in that. And I said, well, I've always wanted to do feminist art. And they said, we've got that for you. So I had someone, so one of my advisors was able to introduce me to Harmony Hammond, who also was a founding member of the A.I.R Gallery. And through that, I did finish my master's, and my thesis was on heresies art. So it's an arts collective of women. It also was a mag that published semi-annually, which it's a volunteer organization run by women, so they publish as often as they could. But my thesis was on heresies mag and situating the individual within second wave feminism. So I knew about heresies mag, and through heresies I learned about A.I.R Gallery, which we'll be speaking about a bit today. But I wasn't sure who would be here today. So I wanted to situate the subject matter of why the 1970s until today, for anyone that may not be familiar. I think I can kind of move through this quickly, but I thought it would be helpful. So what is second wave feminism? I think many of us know the first wave of feminism was the push to get women the right to vote. It was also to get women to universities. It was to get women to actually run for office, to serve in positions in the community. So that was first wave, end of the 19th, early 20th century. In the year 1920, we have the 19th Amendment. It finally passes and women have the right to vote. So I have brought several books about feminisms here, which offer kind of a wider view. I'm not going to do that here today because I want to focus and just kind of offer you a platform of how we're getting to the 4 spaces we're going to talk about. But second wave feminism really started in the 60s. And I have some visuals of that we can start with here. So the feminine mystique, which many of you may be familiar with, it really became a blockbuster. There was a great article that now is essential reading for anyone in our history program, which is why have there been No Great Female or No Great Women Artists by Linda Nochlin. So Linda wrote that in the early 70s, and already at that point, it was starting to hit kind of a cultural, I would say like a critical mass. Like you had these women's studies programs now, these women-run bookstores. For those of you who lived it, I don't have to explain it to you, but I'm just letting you know. Here's where we've already been, right? Here's where things kind of started out. But it is one of the waves. We had a first wave, we've had a second wave. At this point, we've had a third, fourth. Some people say there's been like a cyber wave of feminism. So the waves are still continuing. But for the purpose of today, we're starting really with the after effects of second wave feminism. And then just for fun, I thought we could all find what the meaning was of feminism. And so the Oxford Dictionary, because we all want to kind of agree on what this is, says, it's the advocacy of equality of the sexes and the establishment of the political, social, and economic rights of the female sex and the movement associated with such. So that is what we are just establishing today to talk about what these women were actually doing in these spaces, right? Advocating for feminism. And then I'm a child of the 90s, so like we used to be like, yeah, we love girls, girls rule, like okay, girl power. And that's really third wave of feminism. And I think of the Spice Girls were kind of the critical moment for me to enter like sort of the girl power moment. So I was like, what is girl power? Like it used to be like women doing it for ourselves, or like women, like sort of like a by women for women. And these are kind of the mottos that are speaking to that idea of like, who are we in society? Are we second class or are we first class citizens, right? So again, just kind of showing, you might have a few different, as Taylor Swift would say, the eras of maybe feminism. But throughout all of it, it's this idea that we have equality and that women should be speaking up. And in the art world, what that means, here you see Gloria Steinem, this is a painting of her, which I'll speak about shortly. But in the art world, what this really means is having access to spaces to show your artwork as a woman, having reviews of your shows, having your work in the collection of a major museum, having it sold at Sotheby's for millions of dollars, along with the male artists of the same frame of time. So just to drive that home, I have a little video here that I'll see if it'll let me play. I also just wanted to add as a side note, not for research for this, but a few years back I found out that in Switzerland women were not allowed to vote until the year 1971, which is insane. But also here you couldn't have like a bank account or even a credit card until the 80s at major banks as a woman. So I had those little notes prepared in case there was like a younger crowd that didn't live through that. But it is a little shocking when you look back. That's not that long ago. Like the gallery was open. We had a female director. These moments, it is a clip from a film, and it's called War, Women Arts Revolution, and it's by Lynn Hirschman-Leeson. And she actually is interviewing museum visitors in front of the Whitney and over at the MoCA LA and saying, what are some women artists you know? And she goes, what are 3 women artists? And 2 people go, Frida. Oh yeah, Frida Kahlo, yeah. And then she's like, well, who are 2 others? And there's a great still of this guy, and it's like on the West Coast, so he like has this like very West Coast looking here, like a surfer guy, and he's like sort of staring off into the sun like, yeah. And it's just a great visual, so I'm happy to share this after, but how do I go? Oh, I think I'm in presenter mode. Are you able to see? Oh, you're not able to see that. Great. Okay, then we'll move on. Right, so that video is here. This past week I went to, and I promise this is related to the theme of the talk, but just allow me to digress into the tree rings for a moment. I went to the 21C Museum Hotel in St. Louis. They have a show right now that's called The Future is Female. And it's a great selection of artworks of women artists. It's not only women artists, actually. This piece by, this painting is by an artist, here his name's Gavin Nolan. It is of Gloria Steinem, which is why it's in the show. But I just love this work here by Tiffany Schlein. And if you know at all about trees and tree rings, which I'm sure many of you here, I don't need to explain this to you, but if you look at tree rings, it shows you the age of the tree, or how old it was, right? So what Tiffany did was she kind of added a spin on it that's a more feminist angle. So she's showing you the year and then what happened. So my favorite thing on here was that in the year 1993, women were allowed to wear pants on the floor of the Senate. How freeing for them, right? So in 2006, you have the Me Too movement. So she's actually gone in here and she's located the year. I just think this is a lot of work just on its own. This is phenomenal, right? So she's looking at what's happened in terms of women's history, but situating it within the natural world. Yes, you could tell I really like this piece. But one thing that I did see here was in the year 2016, which I don't know if you can read it, it says Hillary Clinton receives the majority of votes, aka the popular vote, for the US presidential election. And when I was trying to gear up for this presentation today, I wanted to talk about spaces that were run by women, and I wanted to make it meaningful. So when I saw that, and through various other conversations I had here, it made me think of a house in town that used to have this poster out front. I was not here for it, but this was Lena Finer's Women Institute and Gallery, and this was iconically there for many years, and everyone sort of knew that it would be there, I think, when they showed up to the gallery, right? It was not a surprise. In the year 2010, if you look to the far left, and if you visit us at the gallery on the ephemera table, which is as you walk in on the left wall in the back, we have a flyer here for a women's art symposium that was held in the year 2010. Lena was instrumental in that. She is actually listed on that program, so we owe her really a debt of gratitude for her work on that and for all the work that she has also done to highlight women artists, both in town and also bringing them in from the outside. So this is one of the 4 spaces we are going to be speaking about today. I also realized I forgot to give all of my acknowledgments early on, and I'm going to do it now. So thank you to the Working Men's Institute for allowing me to look into the archive and to look through all of the show cards that Lena Finer had in her gallery at the time of her passing. They were actually handed in here, and also thank you to Janet Moritz for telling me they were here, and I think for bringing them here. Thank you to Marianne Mishna for speaking with me about Lena. Also thank you to Connie Weinzapfel and to Dan Mason, and also to Paul Allison, who now lives in the home and shared some insights with me about the space as well. So it was really, this is a group effort, it's not just me, but I did want to give those acknowledgments before I moved to any further. Okay, so we've kind of already looked at this. For those of you that may be familiar with women's liberation or second wave feminism, you probably know here at the bottom all the protests that were happening. So this is actually a scene from an organized action or an organized collective action, which is by NOW, which is the National Organization for Women. One thing that's intriguing about these kind of like moments in history where there's kind of a swelling in terms of like socio-political awareness or like a cultural awareness is often it's through many organizations who all come together. And that's an effort that's really more of a coalition, and that's what NOW was. It was a coalition of women's groups. You had the Puerto Rican Women's Organization, and the Lesbians Women's Organization, and the Housewives, the suburban women would all come together and form a coalition, and then they would march through Congress, or march through Washington, and seek out the members of Congress to act up and ask for what they wanted to see happen, and for the change that they wanted to see actually enacted in their benefit. We will be talking about some of that in the Where Are We Now, if you look to the bottom, but at the time they were able to advocate for many things, and also in a lot of ways the visibility, right, of these actions is what, I mean, at the time it was headlines everywhere. You had here on the bottom left, this is an HBO poster, but it's when Gloria Steinem went undercover for Show Mag and wrote her expose about what it was like to be a Playboy bunny, right? She then, through that, was able to start her own magazine, right, Ms. Mag. So really, even if things like the ERA, which we will get into, isn't able to be ratified, you do have a visibility that was not present even 15 years prior to this, right? Some of you may or may not be familiar with the Guerrilla Girls. That's at the top left. They often do actions. They are still active, by the way. And they often do actions at museums where they stand up front in a full gorilla costume. Some of their identities are known, but many are still not known. And it's also a coalition of women of every background. And the reason why they do this is because what's more important is the message. So they'll say things like, do women have to be naked to get into the Met? And then they'll show you the percentages, actual data. How many women artists are in the Met? And I I would say regardless of your interest in feminism, it is kind of mind-blowing to see the statistics because you realize, how far we may have come, but how far we still have left to go. I actually have a bag that I didn't bring today that has, it has one of their logos on it that I love, but it's all the joys of being a woman artist, and it lists them, and one of them is like, never having to work because you don't have any shows. So like, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek or like a humorous way to look at a very serious subject matter. But they've had a lot of exhibits. They most recently, what's Hannah? I'm not going to think of the name of the gallery now, but founded for women artists. Really, they've expanded on that mission, but they were happening around the same time, so they were contemporaneous women's art spaces in the 70s. So again, this is like 2 to 3 years before the New Harmony Gallery was founded. Art exhibits and activities at the LA Women's Building. So this was in Los Angeles, actually downtown Los Angeles, from 1973 to 91. And I'm a little nosy. So whenever a space happened to close down, I said, what happened, right? Like, was it loss of funding? So here there was a graphics workshop, and they just, over time, they gradually lost business, unfortunately. So the whole building then was kind of relying on that income, and it was no longer able to support itself. But of the top 3, A.I.R Gallery is still in existence. And then we have the Women's Institute and Gallery, which is run by Arlene, or Lena Feiner, as many of you know her, 2000 and 2020. And when she passed on, as I mentioned, a lot of the show materials, the ephemera, the show cards were then held here after that time at the Working Men's Institute. So if you ever want to come and see that, if you want to relive those shows, I heard the openings were fantastic. You can kind of have that experience through looking into the archive that we have here. So starting with A.I.R Gallery, I feel like, oh, you know what, hang on, I need to get my book. Okay, well, we'll just have to move through. A.I.R Gallery was founded in 72. So, let me pull my notes up. Lucy Lepard was part of the set, but she was not one of the women artists who founded it. Lucy Lepard is an art critic who's very well known, primarily for speaking, I'd say, on arts and feminism. So she was one of the critics early on who was truly a champion for these women artists. So she says she has an essay on A.I.R. She says that the gallery was founded because, in spite of the gains made early on by women artists, the majority of the emergent women had no place to show their art. The commercial galleries were filled up with men, and even if more goodwill extended than it actually does, it would take forever for women to sift through the extant openings. Other co-ops also tended to be run, so this is a cooperative sort of style of gallery where there's members running it. Other co-ops also tended to be run mainly by men and to lack the cohesion that a political alliance, no matter how feeble, provides an all-women gallery. Precedents existed on the West Coast, and she mentions women's space, and she mentions the LA Women's Building. And A.I.R itself has since been followed by other women-run spaces. And then she mentions the Art in Artemisia in Chicago, which is listed here, 707 and the Grandview Galleries in LA, Hera in Wakefield, Rhode Island, Soho 20 in New York, Warm in Minneapolis, and so forth. Most of these, like A.I.R, follow the presentational conventions of the commercial gallery, though A.I.R is a non-profit, and the proceeds of all the artworks that are sold will go directly to the artist with no commission to the dealer. So it's easier to see why women artists would want to invest their time and volunteer to make events and exhibitions happen, because they do have the full value of the sale of their work. That's a pretty good deal. An art gallery is not going to do that for you, but they'll also do all of the work that's required to produce an exhibit, right? So their format and their framework was such that it took a lot of their time just to manage the gallery space. This is an image here in front of you at the bottom right. It's by Meredith Ellison. I have an image of her later on with the other founding members, but it's actually a riff on Rembrandt's The Anatomy lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tolt. So at the top right, you can see the cadaver with all the students and the medical, and the medical teacher. But here at the bottom left, you have the cadaver and it says, the patriarchy, which is pretty straightforward. But it's also just a way for them to make fun of themselves a little bit. I think they were really recognizing the work ahead of them and just like the depth of what they were doing. And it's a way to situate themselves also also within an art historical framework that maybe has not always recognized women artists. So I thought this was a good image to use. And I guess so did Mary Beth at A.I.R. because it's in their archives and materials. So if New York is the center of the art world, where was the artwork by women? I have a book that's called From the Center, Feminist Essays on Women's Art. And I did have excerpts I want to share from that, but I'm actually a little bit slow and I have an hour, so I want to make sure I cover everything. I'm going to skip that for now. But essentially what Lucy says is that when it comes to New York City, it's harder to build actual coalitions because there's so much competition. She actually mentions this when she's speaking about the LA Women's Building, so I'll also get to that a few slides on. But she does say that in New York City to have all these spaces and then to have two spaces, you have So 20 and you have A.I.R. Gallery and hundreds of spaces that are not for women artists specifically. So think of all the competition, right? You've already heard from our quote that's happening just to get into one of these other galleries if you're one of, say, 50 women. So these spaces are really integral to having a platform, to showing your work, and to getting some critical feedback. You know, they would work to get men and women into the space to offer feedback on the work that they're making. A lot of times they would have slideshow reviews. So this is something we all know there was an era before the internet, I think here, yes. So artists would send in their slides and then they would show them. And the women artists who were already members would weigh in on it. If an artist wanted to become a member, they would offer feedback on how to get there. They may accept them as a member. And that's really valuable work. I mean, these women have studied in these major universities, and then they want to show, and these are the kind of spaces where they're able to have that feedback and then show, and even perhaps have a solo show, the dream someday, right? So without A.I.R., which again was founded in 72, they wouldn't have that opportunity necessarily. So that again, really the purpose for that collective action is for artists to be able to show their own work who are women artists. And the results are, I mean, it's still open today, first thing. Truly there's an audience that really believes in this space. And I'm going to show you as well some of the other results, which more, I would say more concretely speak to the show that's in the gallery now as well. I didn't want to leave you hanging. So this is actually a scan of a program that's in the art gallery now for Look Both Ways, 50 years after New Harmony Gallery Contemporary Art. And I wanted to scan this to show, I know that we've had many programs. I'm sure some of you have attended perhaps Lisa Harkins when she had her talk over at the gallery, or for the totality exhibit, we had Professor Scheller speak on the history of solar eclipses, right? But this is a single year program at A.I.R. Gallery, and this is an 80, it's from 80 to 81, and the quality of artists named on this roster as an art historian is thrilling. You've got just like artists that have shown around the world. So you have Howardina Pendel, Anna Mendieta. So Janet Henry is actually Janet Olivia Henry, who I mentioned, who's in our space. You've got Mary Beth Ellison, of course, who's very active in A.I.R. And one of the founders. And then you have 5 women artists who moved to New York from Chicago. So they're hearing perspectives of the kind of women who were at Artemisia Gallery, who had started these women's spaces in Chicago here in New York. Not only that, but you have the LA Women's Building. So all these women were just already forming all of these networks and connections really across the US. And yes, it was a little bi-coastal, but it wasn't exclusively. Like we heard there was a warm art space in Minneapolis, and they were really plugged into one another. And oh, and here's Heresies, which I wrote about. So it's phenomenal to see all of the work and effort. I mean, if anyone's trying to organize a concert, just trying to get everybody to arrive on time to play, this is a whole year of it. It's phenomenal to see the work that went into this. So this is in the gallery. Feel free to come study at length if you would like to. But again, if we're talking about the results of the space and what they're able to achieve, I think this helps a lot. So again, some other ways that the space is somehow connected to the current show. On the left-hand side here, you have A.I.R. Gallery at their Crosby location. They have since moved to the waterfront in Brooklyn, although I was speaking to one of the members, I think they're about to move again because real estate in New York is crazy, but they're still open, they're still in New York, just they're no longer Manhattan, they're over in Brooklyn. So if you look at the artist holding the flag that has the address, you can just like see the I.R. That's Mary Beth. I think you can tell she was a bit of a personality, and some of you have met her, and you may also know that as well. Here we have a program that was in 2018. It's called The Dialectics of Entanglement. Do we exist together? Very lofty title. And it points to a program that they had done earlier. So it actually points to the year 1980, which is the same year that this program was from. They apparently had an exhibition that was in dialogue with the dialectics of isolation. So again, like they're pointing to the artist Anna Mendieta, Kazuko Miyamoto, Zarina, and then you see here again, you have Janet Olivia Henry, which is her name in our show. We have a work on loan from her, which is called America. A.I.R. Rodriguez-Azumi just had her solo show there, and we have the Feminist Art Lecture Series, which is still ongoing even from those early days. So she spoke about activating the archive and rewriting history through a feminist lens. I believe it's on their YouTube. She is coming here next year in June, and she's so lovely. She's Japanese Caribbean, but specifically from Okinawa. So she uses flags to kind of speak about identity, and it's a very family-friendly way to work. And the artists of all ages are able to come and make a flag of their own, or to work in a collaborative way. So she presented on that here for A.I.R. So I'm just, again, foregrounding here the ways in which you're able to walk in to look both ways and see things in a richer way through the lens of these feminist art spaces or women-run spaces. So a little closer to home, you had Artemisia Gallery. One project I wanted to focus on that they were able to do somewhat is here on the left, and I'll speak about that shortly. But Artemisia was actually directly inspired by A.I.R. Gallery. They were founded a year after A.I.R. It was through Web, or West-East Bag, which reminded me a lot of the Binders Full of Women, if you remember that. So West-East Bag was like women would throw their name into the ring, and then they could be looked at like in this bag, or like a presentation of women. You could see their artwork. If you wanted to show a woman artist, you could see what it was that they did. You could read their statement. So there was a conference in Chicago, and it was essentially a women's art conference. And Harmony Hammond, who was one of the founding members of A.I.R., was there speaking about A.I.R. in Chicago. And Joe Coy, who's one of the founding members of Artemisia, said, well, why don't we have that here? And why not? Chicago has the school, the Art Institute of Chicago. You're not far from many other major universities where artists are able to come to a major metropolis if they want to try to like meet other artists and work in community and have exhibitions. So she went and she visited New York, and then she came back to Chicago and said, here's what they're doing, guys, we gotta pull it together. So they did. So there were 5 members who really started it and invested in it, and then they selected 15 other artists who were women artists to help them to build out the programming. I already mentioned Artist Resident Chicago, the art gallery that is still existing, that I think again has shifted their mission a bit. But at the time, in the 70s, these were 2 spaces to show women's art in Chicago. So of all of their exhibitions and programs, and they do have a website, happy to share that with you. I did not make a bibliography page, which I should have, but I'm also happy to send out after anyone wants to leave their email. I can, in addition to all of the books on this table, there are plenty of websites I can share. But this project is called Critical Messages, the Use of Public Media for Political Art by Women. So the gallery invited women artists to send in essentially a billboard that advanced, I would say, messages that the artists felt were important. This was the Reagan era of the 80s. So 18 images were chosen, and Chicago Public Transit, who had agreed to show these works by women artists, I think were surprised by the 18 that were submitted, and elected to show only 10 of them. So what the gallery did, because again, this was the Reagan era, so the gallery said, you know what, we'll show the other 8. So you can actually look and see, like, there were Chicago, like on the buses in Chicago, like the advertising banners would have this artwork. This is actually a form of exhibiting art that is more common today than it was then. So this is really an avant-garde, experimental way of showing art. You had it like at the bus stops, you had it at any public transit site, you would have these artworks by women with a political message. It's a pretty strong way to show art. So the gallery had the rest of it kind of aggregated into the space, and then it was a way to go see the show at the gallery and then to go out to Chicago and see more of it on the streets, the ones that were selected to be shown. So again, here to the left, you have Judy Chicago, who As you may have guessed, her name was a Chicago-based artist, although she did go to LA and start a feminist art school there. And then to the right, you have a photography collective, which is part of Artemisia Gallery A.I.R exhibit. So again, all of these images are from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. They have a great website. They have a finding an exhibit that undergraduate students put on about Artemisia and the work that this gallery did, which was very heartwarming. So all of that's available online. And then again, here's a timeline also from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago archives, but it kind of shows you again just the level of work that goes into these kind of spaces, right? So they have member shows, multiple members. You see all these names here. They all were in art shows together. You had some guest presentations or lectures. You had Pat Sear, who's a very well-known painter. You also had Marcia Tucker, who at the time was a curator of the Whitney Museum. This is 1973-74, that's the bottom left. She went on to found her own museum, which is called the New Museum in New York City. She was a well-known figure on the scene, but they had Marcia Tucker here at Artemisia before she even founded her own museum. So that's fairly impressive. And these are the members' names up on the top right. And again, together they collectively selected 15 other members. And that's kind of the way these spaces went. We had about 20 members. They would run the space together. Somebody would be treasurer. Somebody would be secretary. Over the years, it would alternate. Somebody would have a fight, maybe quit, someone else would come in. So that's kind of what was happening here. And I will skip the readings for now, just in order to stay on time. Because we have two more spaces. So the second to last is the LA Women's Building. And that was, as I mentioned, running from 1973 to 91, and it was in LA. So it was actually in downtown LA, and I wanted to show a map. If anyone's familiar with LA, I'm not. I hate driving in cities. So up on the top left, you have where the, I don't know if I can zoom in. Okay. Here you have where the gallery was located, and it's here in the middle of all these beautiful parks. You also have several other art galleries that are hard to see here. The Brewery Artist Lofts, I think, is maybe the one thing that you can see. But really, because that space was there in the 70s and 80s, this area started to gentrify. This little corner, I would say, of maybe downtown LA, was seeing this incredible arts building, and everyone wants to go to art openings and have wine and look cool. So they're like, we're gonna move nearby. Well, it helped to gentrify and really spruce up the area that it was in, which also, as often can happen with art spaces and cultural spaces, eventually started to make the rent unattainable for them there. But it also helped to improve the downtown area of LA. So the LA Women's Building has an interesting history, and I didn't want to dive down too deep of a rabbit hole. So I thought I would just summarize what it was that they had in the building. So they had the Feminist Studio Workshop, the Women's Graphic Center, which I mentioned eventually lost their clients, and they had a hard time making their lease payments. The Sisterhood Bookstore, which is a nice women-run bookstore named Sisterhood, hard to beat that. Associated Women's Press, the Women's Liberation Union, and also the Now Chapter Office for LA. So, I mean, just imagine, just being at the water cooler in this building. You're hearing about the protests women are going to, the advocacy work they're doing, an art show, a feminist, reading or poetry reading or live art performance, and it's all happening in this same address, the same location. These are some ephemera from the space itself because it no longer exists. It does have an archive, and they are actively trying to do more work to preserve the history of the building as well. They have a gala every year, and they're trying to get more awareness around the impact of this building. So as I mentioned, it was located in LA, the downtown area, 1727 North Spring Street. I had an issue with links earlier, so I'm not even going to try to click through that, but that's their website. So you can see kind of the range of ephemera that they have that shows over the years who they've had in the building. It's a phenomenal list of artists, as I'm sure you would not be surprised to know. One interesting fact that I thought really drove home this idea of artists working together in these extended sort of networks across the US, and how I think New Harmony also plugs into this through Lena, but also through others of us here. The LA Women's Building was named after the Women's Building in the Columbia 1893 Exposition in Chicago, which featured, so it was a whole building, and it expressed the culture of women from around the world. So you have a space here that's directly impacted by Chicago, and a Chicago space that started because of the New York space. This is just it's like a national conversation happening. It's just beautiful to see that. So I wanted to add that here for some context because I thought that was a lovely circumstance here. And again, it was really a one-stop shop. You could go there and you could buy a book, you could see a show, you could hear a talk, and you could sign up for the expert test. So hard to argue with that. This is actually a recreation. So they do have artist books and zines, but I think this is more of a recreation of sort of how we have the ephemera table, actually, not to toot my own horn, but we have the ephemera table in the gallery that shows you kind of shows over the years. You have the postcards, you have the Women's Art Symposium flyer. So here you have flyers from over the years of shows that were held at the LA Women's Building, but this is from 2018. And it's actually, so there's a design studio in the building that's right next door. So they reached out to the Women's Building and said, hey, do you have anything that we could show to honor the history of you being right next door for all these years? And they said, oh, do we? So they gave them all of this material, and they had an exhibit in 2018. It's called Metabolic Studio. And it just really featured that really rich history of all of the events and programs that they had at the Women's Building, which now no longer have a house. So they kind of offered them a home at the studio for a moment, temporarily. And this is kind of the ending point of the LA Women's Building. Judy Chicago, again, Chicago, she's an artist from Chicago that moved to LA. There's a lot of very rich history of her and Miriam Shapiro really founding the first school of arts for women in LA. That would be a whole other presentation. I'm not going to do that to myself. But one of the things that actually emerged from that was this project that was called Woman House. And as you may surmise, they took women artists into a house and they literally took over the house. So they had art installations in bathrooms and hallways and the kitchen. Anywhere there was a place to put art, you bet they put it. So this is my favorite. This is by Faith Wilding, and that's the artist. It's called the Womb Room, like a womb room. And it's really like, we know this now as kind of like a yarn bombing technique. It's actually a thing artists really do now. If you've ever been to like maybe like a public art festival, then you might have seen this or come across it. But she really pioneered it, and it felt like spiderwebs. You're walking through this room, right? There are some videos of it, but not many. So that was one of the, I would say, one of the more recognized rooms in Woman House. And this is Miriam and Judy on the steps to promote it. But it really got a lot of press and a lot of attention at the time, mainly because it was a strange project, but also because all of these incredible women really put their heart and souls into transforming each room in this house into an art space. I think that felt unusual at the time, and it felt like something worthy of attention, and I think it is still worthy of attention. But also, Woman House happened in '72, and then the LA Women's Buildings happened in '73. So they must have had a great time with organizing Woman House, and then they decided, why don't we do a whole building? So that was interesting. Okay, so now we've talked about all of the other spaces, and we're now arriving at Women's Institute and Gallery, or WIG. I will be honest, this was the hardest space to research online. And as a millennial, I hate being on the phone. So I went to go meet with people and chat with them the most I could in the community about Women's Institute and Gallery. So I have some notes on that. And I've also written a little bit here. So Lena Feiner, after spending time visiting New Harmony, relocated here from Chicago. She was an expert in library sciences, and I believe, from what I've heard, had the mind of a librarian and knew a lot of information and would happily share it with anyone. She had the gallery open up until 2020. Through various conversations, she's really primarily been described as a repository for knowledge. She knew artists in the art world, even on like a personal level, is what I understand. And she had personal histories with these artists and would be able to recount encounters and other projects and shows that they had had. She attended lectures and understood the history and impact of women in the arts. It feels like an understatement, I think, to say that, but that's how I have worded it here. So again, just kind of reviewing the themes of this presentation, the idea of like women working within these artist networks and with collective actions. I wanted to summarize a few of the ways that WIG was able to do that. So these are images from the archive. I had a wonderful conversation with Marianne Mission, thank you again to Marianne about shows there. But I have some notes in speaking to Dan and to Marianne, and I also just wanted to say as well, you can find world-class things in New Harmony. I don't think it's surprising to find Lena here. I feel like that goes without saying, but I wanted to say it. And she would bring world-class artists here. So one of the anecdotes that I like to hear about was in the recent work show, which was with Marianne and Martha Kaplan. Lena had apparently reached out to Martha to show, who then reached out to Marianne to show, and it just became this wonderful new form of connection where these women who were in the arts and active and really engaged all knew each other and were able to have a show together. I was not at that opening. I'm sure it was very well attended.
It was.
It was, yeah. I'm sure. I've heard 100+ for the openings. I heard that Lena would actually make food herself and make people feel welcome and very at home. And I just want to stress again, because even though I wasn't able to meet Lena, the value and the quality of the work she was doing, to host these poetry meetings, to be part of Art Stroll, to have these conversations one-on-one, I think with anyone who would walk in, is what I've heard. It's an incredible effort, and to have someone that world-class here isn't surprising to me. And I'm sure she brought in people from all over, because she had so many people at her openings that would have either had to be half the town, or they were, probably coming from the region. So some of the reflections that I got were that she was encouraging, she was independent, she had a background in library sciences and was interested in everything. She was supportive of women working in multiple spheres. So again, having, I think there's something from a book launch here. Here you go. You had a poetic evening and a poetic afternoon in 2004 and 2005. So, I mean, yes, it was visual arts, it was women artists, but it also was, I think, just the evidence of I would say, an intellectual curiosity for what's happening in arts and culture. And also ways to form connections. We're talking about women artist networks. She had a show of Anne. So we have work by Anne Lannert in our 50th show. And she had a show of these three-dimensional composites, which I would call assemblages maybe, but I wasn't there, in photography in 2002. But it's also when Anne had a show at the Gallery Hertz in Louisville. So if you had seen her work in Louisville and you were coming to New Harmony, you then were able to see her work in an expanded way. And these are really thoughtful things that I think shows the quality of how someone's approaching exhibitions as well. She also had a gallery shop, I think similar to ours, but maybe a little different, and articles and poetry readings. And I just wanted to also say I wasn't able to do the research for this that I would have liked to, but I'm sure that if she didn't actually see shows at Artemisia in Chicago, she knew about them. She knew what was happening, and outside of Chicago as well. And for her, first of all, to have access to the talent that is here in this region, there's a great wealth of artistic talent in the tri-state and here in New Harmony, I have to say, especially. And for her to recognize that and to bring that into shows, both solo shows such as the paintings of Karen Roth, or even these little either 2- or 3-person shows or group shows, such as here Marking Our Ways with Cynthia and Janet. Lena recognized that, and she could know how to put people together to have these wider conversations and to really demonstrate the quality that is here in the region. And also knew artists from outside. She had a show, there were too many show cards for me to put here, but there was a show about Chicago, and she had these 2 artists that were from Illinois but also coming here. So for me, the takeaway was that she had really an intimate knowledge of the art world, but just really a balanced sense of curiosity. She knew artists like Warhol. She had a focused attitude and would talk to you to advance the places within the art world, but also she was also, it seemed like she was always ready and willing to share her knowledge with others, which, when you run an art space, it's a lot of energy to do that. So I have a lot of respect for her for doing that, and also for having the lived experience and knowledge to bring, really, to me, the kind of information of what's happening on a larger scale to the conversations that she would have here. And to get to know artists here and to support them. I think our main job as cultural creators is to support and encourage artists. And that's why we're here. But that's my soapbox. So that's that's what I have about WIG. I would like to dig into it more, but with what I have, this is what I was able to present. And I'm also happy to listen to anyone speak at me or to me about WIG after this if you'd like to. But